I still remember the smell of that office the first time I stepped inside. Leather, polished wood, and the faint trace of expensive cologne that clung to the air like it owned the place. It was my first week at the cleaning company, a new start I desperately needed. The manager had called me into her cramped little office and handed me a fresh assignment. Hannah, we've got a premium client downtown. Law firm, Montgomery and Partners. They want someone reliable for the top floor. You'll be in charge of the executive suite. I nodded, pretending to be grateful for the chance. In reality, my stomach tightened. A prestigious client in a skyscraper in downtown Seattle meant more money. Yes, but also more pressure. Still, money was money, and I had 3 little mouths waiting at home. I couldn't afford to be picky. That evening, I rode the elevator up to the 45th floor of a glass tower that seemed to scrape the gray Seattle sky. The carpet was thick beneath my shoes, muffling my footsteps as if to remind me I didn't belong there. The receptionist had already gone home, and the hallway was silent. I found the brass plaque that read, David Montgomery, Managing Partner. The name sliced through me like a knife. For a moment I froze, my hand hovering over the door handle. My pulse quickened, my vision blurred. Montgomery. Could it be the same? No. Seattle was full of people. Surely it was just a coincidence. I forced myself to breathe and pushed the door open. The office was dim, the city lights pouring through floor-to-ceiling windows. Behind a massive mahogany desk sat a man in a tailored navy suit, flipping through a stack of papers. He looked up, and in that instant my knees nearly buckled. It was him, David Montgomery, the man who had destroyed my life 5 years ago. He didn't flinch. His eyes rested on me, cool and distant, before his face settled into a neutral mask. "You must be the new cleaning staff," he said in a voice as steady as stone. Not a flicker of recognition, not a shadow of guilt. To him, I was no one. "Yes," I whispered, gripping the handle of my mop so tightly my knuckles turned white. My throat burned, but I forced the word out. "Good," he said, already turning back to his documents. "My office is cleaned daily after 7 p.m. You can get the keys from the administrator. Don't be late." That was it. No sign he knew me. No acknowledgement of the night that changed everything. I slipped out quickly, pressing my back against the cold wall of the hallway, my chest heaving. The world spun around me. How could fate be this cruel? To place me here, in his office, in his orbit, when I had worked so hard just to keep breathing. My hands trembled as memories I had buried clawed their way back to the surface. I was 22 then, walking home after evening classes at the university. I had wanted to become a teacher, to help children learn the way my own teachers had once inspired me. That night, I cut through Volunteer Park, a mistake I would regret for the rest of my life. He came out of nowhere, tall, broad-shouldered, the smell of whiskey and cigars rolling off him. I tried to step aside, but he blocked my path. His voice was slurred but sharp. "Where are you rushing, sweetheart?" I begged him to let me pass. He didn't. He grabbed my arm. My screams for help echoed through the empty park, swallowed by the trees. No one came. The rest is a blur of pain, fear, and the suffocating weight of his body. When it was over, he fixed his suit, smoothed his tie, and walked away as if nothing had happened. As if I were nothing. I lay on the damp ground, shattered and nameless. And now, 5 years later, he sat in front of me, my employer, a man of power in the city, with his perfect life and perfect reputation intact. I couldn't run. I couldn't scream. Not anymore. I had 3 children at home who depended on me. I had no choice but to swallow the rage clawing at my throat, pick up my mop and become invisible. For him, I was just the cleaning lady. For me, he was the ghost I could never escape. When I found out I was pregnant, the world collapsed beneath my feet. I was sitting in a cramped clinic in North Seattle, staring at a thin sheet of paper that read positive. My hand shook so badly I thought I might tear it in half. Pregnant. The word didn't make sense. I was only 22, barely starting my life, still dreaming of teaching in a classroom one day. But the doctor's calm voice cut through my disbelief. "You're not just pregnant. You're carrying 3. Triplets." My mind couldn't grasp it. I walked home in silence, the city lights blurring into streaks as the bus rattled past Capitol Hill. I told myself that once I told my fiancé, everything would be okay. We had plans, after all. He had promised we'd build a life together, simple but steady. When I showed him the test, his face drained of color. He stammered excuses, money, school, timing. And then, without even a backward glance, he left. I stood at the window of our tiny apartment that night, clutching my stomach, feeling more alone than I thought possible. My parents, living in Oregon, were horrified when they found out. 3 children out of wedlock? "Hannah, what have you done?" My father couldn't look at me. My mother cried. In the end, they offered a small monthly check, but their disappointment stung more than their absence. 9 months stretched into an eternity. My body ballooned under the weight of 3 lives pressing against my ribs. Sleep became a luxury I no longer knew. The night of delivery, a February storm raged outside. At Seattle General Hospital, I gripped the rails of the bed until my knuckles were white. Hours of contractions, blurred into screams. The doctors' voices were urgent, the room crowded with nurses. And then Michael, firstborn, his cry sharp and demanding. Madeline, seconds later, tiny but fierce. Daisy, the last, fragile as a whisper. 3 little faces, wrinkled and red, their fists clenched against the cold air of the world. I wept, not from joy, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of it all. 3 children, no father, no steady income, no plan, just me. The years that followed were a battlefield. I moved into a basement apartment in Rainier Valley, walls cracked, heat barely working. At night, I lined up the cribs side by side, praying none of them would wake, though they always did. Feedings, diaper changes, midnight fevers. Every hour blurred into the next. My body ached from exhaustion. I lived in a haze of formula stains, laundry piles, and the constant hum of survival. There were nights I stood in the kitchen, staring at an empty fridge, calculating whether to pay rent late or skip meals myself. My hands trembled when I used food stamps at the grocery store, the pitying glances of strangers burning into my back. And then, out of all the coldness in the world, there was Mrs. Thompson. She was an elderly widow who lived down the hall, her gray hair always tied in a bun, her voice raspy but kind. She had no children of her own nearby, no grandchildren visiting on weekends. One afternoon, after hearing the babies cry for hours, she knocked gently on my door. "Honey, you need rest. Let me help." From that day forward, she became my lifeline. She rocked Michael to sleep when I couldn't. She taught Madeline her first lullaby. She whispered prayers over Daisy's fragile chest when she wheezed at night. And when I took on night shifts, stocking shelves, wiping tables, scrubbing offices, Mrs. Thompson sat quietly in my living room, knitting while the children slept. Still, even with her kindness, the weight never lifted. The cycle of poverty circled me like a noose. Bills piled higher than paychecks. My dreams of teaching withered into dust. Yet every morning, when I saw 3 pairs of bright eyes staring back at me, I told myself to keep moving. For them, I would endure anything. After my trial period at the cleaning company ended, they gave me a permanent assignment. Montgomery and Partners downtown, my supervisor said, sliding the clipboard across the counter. Big firm. They pay well, but they're particular. Don't miss a shift. I stared at the name. Montgomery. My throat tightened. I'd spent weeks trying to convince myself that night at his office was a cruel coincidence, some twist of fate that placed me in front of the one man I wished I'd never see again. But now, with his name printed clearly on company records, there was no denying it. David Montgomery wasn't just a partner. He was the Montgomery, The first evening I walked back into that skyscraper, every step echoed like a verdict. The polished marble floors, the hushed lobby, the gold lettering on the firm's directory. It all reeked of power. I swiped my badge, rode the elevator up 45 stories, and stood outside his office door again. My palms were damp. My body remembered him before my mind allowed the memories to surface. When I stepped inside, he barely looked up from his desk. "You again," he said flatly. His tone carried no recognition, only indifference. That almost hurt more. I wanted to scream. "Do you really not remember? Do you not see what you did to me every time you look at my face?" But my lips remained sealed. Instead, I moved about the office like a shadow, dusting shelves lined with law books and trophies, vacuuming the thick carpet that muffled my footsteps, emptying the wastebasket where his discarded notes lay crumpled. All while he sat behind the desk, pen scratching across contracts worth more than I'd make in a year. Every time I caught a glimpse of his last name embossed in gold on the wall, Montgomery, my chest burned. Rage tangled with fear. But beneath it all was something worse. Helplessness. He held power not only in that office, but over the past that I could never erase. I needed this job. My kids needed food. Rent needed paying. That reality chained my anger into silence. And then there was the picture. It sat proudly on the corner of his desk, in a silver frame that gleamed under the lamplight. A woman with perfect blonde hair smiled effortlessly, her pearl necklace catching the sun. Beside her stood a boy, maybe 10 or 11, dressed in a private school blazer, his eyes bright and sure. A perfect family captured in glossy stillness. Every night, as I wiped down his desk, my eyes landed on that photograph. My heart clenched. How could he sit there surrounded by wealth, prestige, and love while I scraped together pennies to feed our children? The children he didn't even know existed. It was like living in two separate worlds that had somehow collided. Mine full of exhaustion and worry, his of control and comfort. There were moments when I felt his gaze linger on me. Curious, calculating, but never enough to break through the wall of professionalism. He spoke little, just reminders about schedules or supplies. To him, I was nothing more than the cleaning staff. To me, he was the ghost who haunted every corner of my life. When I left at the end of my shift, riding the elevator back down to the ground floor, I would clutch my tote bag and tell myself over and over, "Don't look back. Don't let him see you break. Your children are waiting. That's all that matters." But the truth was, no matter how tightly I held my composure, each night in that office chipped away at me. Every polished surface I scrubbed reflected not just his face, but my own broken past staring back at me. It started with a cough. At first, I thought it was just another winter cold. Seattle's damp air always seemed to cling to the children's lungs, and we'd fought through our share of runny noses and restless nights. But this time was different. Madeline's cough deepened, her small chest rattling with each breath. By the third night, she was burning with fever, her little body trembling as she clung to me. I rushed her to Seattle Children's Hospital, my heart pounding as I carried her through the fluorescent halls. The doctors moved quickly, examining, listening, ordering tests. "Pneumonia," one of them said finally, his voice firm but kind. "We need to start treatment immediately." Relief washed over me until he explained the cost. The antibiotics she needed weren't covered by the scraps of Medicaid I had managed to qualify for. Even with assistance, the out-of-pocket bill was more than I made in a month. I sat in the plastic chair outside her room, staring at the numbers on the estimate, my vision blurring with tears. I tried to think of options, selling the old stroller, pawning my wedding ring that I'd kept in a drawer for reasons I couldn't explain, begging my parents for more money. But nothing came close to what I needed. Every second I wasted was another second Madeline's tiny lungs fought for air. The next evening, after finishing my shift in David Montgomery's office, I sat down for a moment, exhausted, and the papers I carried slipped from my tote bag, scattering across the floor. Among them was the hospital bill, the numbers glaring like a cruel spotlight. I scrambled to gather them, but not before he looked up. "What's that?" His voice was sharp but curious. "Nothing," I muttered, shoving the papers into a folder. He leaned back in his chair, studying me. It didn't look like nothing. I shook my head, biting my lip, willing the tears to stay hidden. But the weight of it all, the fear, the sleepless nights, the helplessness broke through. My voice cracked as I whispered, "It's my daughter. She's sick. The medicine costs more than I can make in a month. I don't know what to do." For a long moment he was silent. Then he opened a drawer, pulled out a checkbook, and without hesitation began to write. He slid the paper across the desk toward me. I stared at it, stunned. The amount was more than enough, not just for the medicine, but for the hospital stay and follow-ups. I can't take this," I stammered, pushing it back toward him. His eyes met mine, steady and unreadable. "You can and you will. Children shouldn't suffer because of money, or because of pride." I wanted to scream at him, to hurl the check in his face and remind him that he was the reason I was standing here, begging for scraps of mercy. But Madeline's face flashed before my eyes, her lips pale, her breathing ragged. Pride wouldn't save her. This would. With trembling hands, I took the check. Days later, Madeline was home, her fever broken, her laughter echoing faintly in our tiny apartment. Watching her twirl weakly around the living room in her faded, pink pajamas, I felt both gratitude and disgust tearing at me. Gratitude that she was alive. Disgust that her life had been bought with money from the man who had destroyed mine. After that night, David began to notice me more. He asked questions he never had before about how long I'd worked for the company, how old my kids were, where I lived. His voice carried no judgment, only a strange curiosity. Sometimes, late in the evening, I caught a shadow of loneliness in his expression, as if the weight of his own life pressed heavily on him despite the wealth and power surrounding him. But I never let myself forget who he was. The man offering kindness was the same man who had once stolen everything from me, and no amount of checks could change that truth. After that night with the check, something shifted. David Montgomery began noticing me in ways he hadn't before. He would ask about my schedule, whether I was managing the commute, if the children were well. At first, I brushed it off as politeness, but one evening he leaned back in his leather chair and said almost casually, "It isn't right for you to be dragging 3 kids across town every day on the bus. I'll arrange for the company to provide a car." The words landed like a weight in my chest. A car. Something so ordinary for most people, yet unthinkable for me. My instinct screamed to refuse. It felt like another chain tying me to him. But the practical part of me, the mother who spent hours shuttling Michael, Madeline, and Daisy through the rain with grocery bags cutting into my palms, knew what that meant. I nodded stiffly. "Thank you." The words tasted like ash. Not long after, on a rare Saturday when the kids begged for fresh air, I took them to Volunteer Park. The sun was timid, the kind of pale light Seattle offered in spring, but the children ran across the grass as if it were summer. Michael darted ahead, his dark hair falling into his eyes, his jaw already showing a seriousness that didn't belong to an 8-year-old. That's when I saw her, a tall woman in a cream coat, her blonde hair shining, pearls at her ears even on a weekend. She was walking a golden retriever and paused when Michael ran past. Her gaze locked on him, and I saw her lips part ever so slightly. I recognized her from the photograph on David's desk. His wife. She studied Michael as though she were staring at a ghost. Her eyes flicked between him and the children trailing after me, and then to me. I could feel the blood drain from my face. In that instant, I knew exactly what she saw, the resemblance. Michael was the mirror image of David at that age. Even I couldn't deny it. I tugged the kids toward the playground, my heart thudding in my ears. All afternoon, I couldn't shake the terror. If she spoke to David, if she pressed the suspicion, the fragile wall I'd built would crumble. That night, I barely slept, every creak in the apartment sounding like a verdict closing in. The following week, I was cleaning the office when David spoke without looking up from his papers. Hannah. His tone was different, low, careful. Yes. He set down his pen and fixed me with a steady gaze. The children. Michael, Madeline, Daisy, are they mine? The room spun. My knees weakened, and I gripped the edge of the desk to steady myself. I had rehearsed this moment in my head 1,000 times, always swearing I would deny, deflect, protect the secret. But faced with his eyes, searching, unflinching, the truth clawed its way out. Tears burned hot as I whispered, yes. The word hung between us like shattered glass. My chest felt hollow, as though I'd just handed him the most fragile pieces of my life. For 5 years I had carried the burden alone, kept silent to survive. And now, with a single word, the silence was broken. David leaned back slowly, his face unreadable. But his eyes, those eyes that mirrored my son's, were wide with something I had never seen in him before. Not arrogance, not indifference, but shock. And as I stood there, trembling, I realized nothing would ever be the same again. The silence after my confession stretched on so long I thought I might suffocate. David leaned back in his chair, his hands pressed against his mouth, his eyes fixed on some distant point beyond me. For the first time since I had met him again, he looked shaken. Finally, his voice broke through, hoarse and unsteady. I didn't know. Hannah, I swear to you I didn't know. I wanted to laugh, to scream, to throw something heavy against the polished wood of his desk. How could he sit there and claim ignorance? But before I could speak, he continued. 5 years ago, I was a different man. I drank too much. I partied with the wrong people. I was arrogant, reckless. I don't remember that night in the park, not the way you do. I only remember waking up hungover, half-dressed in a stranger's apartment, and thinking nothing of it. That was who I was. He lowered his head into his hands. God help me, I didn't think about who I hurt. The word struck me like a blow. My whole body trembled. You ruined me, I whispered, my throat raw. You left me with scars that will never fade. You left me with 3 children to raise alone. His eyes lifted, glassy with something I refused to name. And they're mine, my children. Hannah, let me try to make this right. Let me support them, school, healthcare, college, whatever they need. Please, don't shut me out. I know I can't change the past, but I can be there now. Anger surged through me, hot and bitter. I slammed the duster I'd been holding onto the desk. You think money will fix this? You think writing checks erases what you did to me? You cannot buy back what you destroyed. He flinched, but didn't back down. No, I can't erase it, but I can be a father. Let me be that much. Let me carry some of this burden. For them, if not for you. I shook my head, tears blurring the room. I wanted to tell him to stay away, to lock every door against him. But deep inside, a seed of fear had taken root, the fear of what would happen if he pressed harder, if he fought for custody, if he used his wealth and influence against me. He had already taken so much. I couldn't risk losing my children too. The weeks that followed unraveled in ways I could never have predicted. Whispers swirled through the firm. His wife appeared less and less at company events. Then, one morning as I entered his office, I saw a manila envelope sitting on his desk. Divorce papers. Her name, neatly typed in black ink. David saw me glance at them. He gave a short, bitter laugh. She knows. Maybe she doesn't know the details, but she suspects. Michael's face, she couldn't unsee it. She doesn't want to fight, only to be free. I said nothing. Part of me felt the smallest flicker of satisfaction. Justice in its cruelest form. Another part of me recoiled, knowing that his broken family could never compare to the years I had spent broken and alone. He looked at me then, weariness etched into the lines of his face. Hannah, I've lost everything. My wife, my home, my reputation. But I will not lose those kids. I'll stand by them no matter what you say. I clutched my tote bag tighter, my voice low but fierce. They are mine. I raised them. Don't forget that. His reply came soft but steady. Ours. They're ours. And with those words, the ground beneath me shifted again. Nothing in my life had prepared me for this. The man I hated more than anyone becoming the only other person bound to my children by blood. It was Michael who fell ill first. My strong, serious boy, the one who always tried to carry the grocery bags for me, the one who hushed his sisters when I was too tired to speak. He had been pale for weeks, but I told myself it was just the endless Seattle rain, the lack of sunlight. Then came the bruises, strange, dark smudges on his arms and legs, too many to be from playing. And when his nose started bleeding in the middle of the night, soaking his pillowcase, I knew something was terribly wrong. At Seattle Children's Hospital, I sat in the sterile exam room, my hand shaking as doctors whispered outside the door. When they finally came in, their faces carried the gravity of men used to delivering devastating news. Acute leukemia, the pediatric oncologist said gently. We need to act quickly. The words echoed in my head until they lost all meaning. Leukemia. My son had leukemia. Tests began immediately. Blood draws, bone marrow biopsies, endless paperwork. Each result brought more despair. Michael's sisters weren't a match. I wasn't a match. No one in the registry surfaced as a suitable donor. Days passed, his condition worsened, and I felt the world closing in on me. It was David who asked to be tested. At first, I thought it was another performance, another way for him to insert himself into our lives. But when the results came back, the doctor pulled us both aside. He's a perfect match, better than we could have hoped for. I stared at the chart in disbelief. Of course he was. The man who had destroyed me was the only one who could save my child. The transplant was scheduled within days. I sat outside the operating room, clutching a worn photograph of the 3 kids at the park, while David lay on one table, Michael on another. They harvested marrow from David's hip bones, liters of it, enough to infuse into my son's veins. The process was brutal. Hours of anesthesia, days of pain that would leave him stiff and aching. But he didn't flinch. When they wheeled him into recovery, pale and groaning, I stood at the foot of his bed. His eyes fluttered open, glassy from medication, but he forced a faint smile. Now, part of me lives inside you, son, he whispered hoarsely, his voice breaking. I had to turn away. Tears spilled down my cheeks. For the first time in 5 years, I saw him not as the monster from the park, but as a father bleeding himself dry to save his child. The days that followed were a blur of beeping monitors, sterile corridors, and whispered prayers. Michael's body fought valiantly, rejecting, accepting, teetering between life and death. I lived in that hospital chair, watching numbers climb and fall on machines I barely understood. David, despite his pain, came every day, walking slowly with a cane, wincing when he sat. He brought small gifts, books for Michael, crayons for the girls. When Michael finally opened his eyes one morning and smiled weakly at me, the weight of the world lifted from my chest. His color returned. His strength little by little seeped back. The doctors spoke cautiously of remission, of new chances. I looked across the room at David, who was sitting quietly in the corner, his hands folded, his face pale but relieved. For the first time, gratitude warred with hatred inside me. He was still the man who had shattered me, but he was also the man who had given my son a second chance at life. And in that fragile space between despair and hope, I realized my world had shifted once again. Life after Michael's transplant took on a rhythm I never expected. Slowly, cautiously, my son regained his strength. His cheeks filled with color again, his laughter returned to our apartment, and with it came an unexpected presence. David Montgomery. He began showing up more often, not just at the hospital, but in the ordinary corners of our lives. One morning, he was waiting outside the school, holding an umbrella to shield the girls from the drizzle as they skipped toward me. Another time, he brought cupcakes to Madeline's birthday, standing awkwardly in the corner of our apartment as children crowded around the table. And when Christmas rolled around, he surprised the kids with a tree taller than I was, delivered straight to our living room with twinkling lights already strung. At first, I tried to resist. I told myself it was dangerous to let him in, that his presence would only tangle the knots of our lives tighter. But children don't carry grudges the way adults do. To them, he wasn't a shadow of my past. He was the man who showed up with gifts, who clapped the loudest at Michael's school play, who knelt to tie Daisy's shoelaces in the park. The words slipped out one evening when Michael tugged at his sleeve and whispered, "Dad, can you help me with my homework?" My breath caught, my body stiffened. David froze too, his eyes darting to mine, searching for permission. I didn't give it, but I didn't take it away either. And from then on, the girls followed. Madeline called him Dad when he carried her backpack. Daisy used it when she begged him to push her higher on the swings. Every time I heard it, my heart twisted. Part of me wanted to snatch the word back, to protect it, to remind them that it belonged to no one but me. But another part of me, the part that saw Michael's smile returning, couldn't bring myself to stop them. One night, after the kids had gone to bed, we stood in the kitchen of my apartment, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. He looked around at the modest space, peeling wallpaper, secondhand furniture, toys scattered across the floor. His expression softened. "I wish," he said quietly, "we could have been a real family." The words landed heavy, pressing against the air between us. For a moment, I saw the longing in his eyes, the way he watched the hallway where the children slept. It wasn't just guilt anymore. It was something deeper, a yearning for what could never be. I shook my head slowly, gripping the edge of the counter to steady myself. We are only parents to our children, nothing more. His jaw tightened, but he nodded. "I know." And yet, as I turned off the kitchen light and walked past the room where my children slept soundly, I felt the contradictions tearing inside me. He was the man I would never forgive, and yet he was also the man they now looked at with love. Watching him tuck Daisy's blanket under her chin, hearing Michael laugh at his jokes, seeing Madeline slip her hand into his without hesitation. It was like staring at a picture of a family I both wanted and despised. I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, caught between the past that had scarred me and the present that tied us together. David Montgomery was no longer just the ghost who haunted me. He had become something far more complicated, an undeniable part of the life I had built, whether I wanted him there or not. That Christmas was different. For the first time in years, our apartment glowed with warmth that came not only from the lights strung around the tree, but from the laughter echoing through every corner. The children darted around in their pajamas, their cheeks flushed with excitement, their eyes shining as if the world had finally remembered them. David was there too, sitting cross-legged on the rug while Daisy clambered onto his lap and Michael carefully arranged ornaments on the lower branches. Madeline hummed along with the carols playing softly from the radio. It should have felt intrusive, seeing him there, but somehow it didn't. Instead, it felt inevitable. After the presents were unwrapped, after the children had drifted off to sleep with candy canes still sticky in their hands, David reached into a bag beside him and pulled out a box wrapped in deep green paper. He slid it across the table toward me. "For you," he said simply. I hesitated before peeling away the paper. Inside was a photo album, bound in leather, the words "Our Family" embossed on the cover. My breath caught as I opened it. Page after page held photographs from the past year. Michael's frail smile after the transplant, Madeline blowing out candles on her birthday cake, Daisy chasing bubbles in the park, the 5 of us standing together in front of the Christmas tree just hours earlier. I traced the images with trembling fingers, my throat tightening. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even close. But it was real, captured in glossy fragments. David's voice was low, almost uncertain. "They'll need something to look back on, to remind them we were here, together." I closed the book and set it gently on the table. For a long moment, I couldn't speak. The truth pressed against my chest like a stone. "I can't forgive you," I said finally, my voice steady but soft. "I can't forget what you did to me. That night, it will never leave me." He nodded, his eyes dark, accepting the weight of my words. "But," I continued, glancing toward the bedroom where my children slept, "I don't regret them. Michael, Madeline, Daisy, they're the best parts of my life. Without that night, they wouldn't exist. And for them, I would endure it all again." The admission startled even me. Pain and gratitude intertwined in ways I still couldn't unravel. We sat in silence, the only sound the faint crackle of the heater and the whisper of wind against the windows. Finally, David spoke. "I know we'll never be more than this, but we are something, a strange kind of family, and I'll never walk away from that again." I met his gaze, searching for deception, for arrogance, for the shadow of the man he once was. Instead, I found weariness, remorse, and something that looked like resolve. "No," I said quietly. "We're not husband and wife. We never will be. But we are bound to them, to this life we've made. That's all that matters." Later that night, after he left and the apartment fell quiet, I sat alone with the photo album on my lap. I flipped through the pages again, studying the faces of my children, the way they smiled when he was near, the way their hands reached for his without hesitation. Healing, I realized, doesn't always come from forgiveness. Sometimes it comes from choosing to love in spite of the past, from building something out of the shards left behind. We were not a perfect family. We were not even a conventional one. But as I closed the album and pressed it to my chest, I knew we were ours. And that was enough.